The golden sun rose gently over the quiet village of Umuocha, casting warm light across the red earth and waking the sleepy birds from their nests. The scent of palm oil, dust, and early morning firewood lingered in the air as the village stirred to life. Among the many children preparing for the day was a 12-year-old girl named Chioma Nwosu. She sat quietly beneath the udala tree at the edge of the compound, her knees drawn up, her slender arms wrapped around them. Her eyes, deep and thoughtful, studied the path that led to the village square. Chioma was different. While other girls her age had begun to carry the shapes of womanhood in their hips and chests, Chioma remained slight, with long limbs and narrow shoulders. Her figure seemed to float rather than walk. The villagers often whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear. They called her names: broomstick, reed girl, string body. Children laughed openly when she passed, and the older women shook their heads with pity, murmuring to one another that something wasn't right. Even her mother, Mama Ifeoma, though filled with love, often looked at her daughter with silent worry. Mama Ifeoma had 2 other children, strong, steady boys named Obinna and Ebuka. They were full of life and muscle, already known for their skills in wrestling and farming. But Chioma, she struggled to lift even a small calabash of water. That morning, Chioma attempted to join the other girls who were fetching water from the stream. She hoisted the empty pot with effort, her thin arms trembling under its weight. As she stepped into the village square, a boy named Kim pointed at her and burst into laughter. "Look! She's going to fly away with that pot. Someone tie her down." Laughter erupted from the nearby children. Chioma's cheeks burned, but she said nothing. She held the pot tighter and walked on, each step echoing with their laughter. When she returned home with only half a pot filled, having spilled the rest trying to keep her balance, Mama Ifeoma said nothing. She simply took the pot and stirred a bit more palm oil into Chioma's dinner. That night, Chioma couldn't sleep. She heard her mother praying at the family shrine. Peeking through a crack in the door, she saw Mama Ifeoma on her knees, kola nuts in hand, whispering to the earth. "Allah, Earth Mother, why does my child walk this world like a ghost? I have fed her. I have bathed her in herbs. Why does she remain this way? Her father had the same bones, thin as moonlight, but full of fire. If his spirit hears me, let him guard her." Chioma's eyes welled with tears. She had never heard her mother speak so. She hadn't known her father, who had died when she was a baby. But now she understood, her body was not a mistake. It was an inheritance. Chioma's broken arm took weeks to heal, and she was excused from school chores during that time. But her spirit wasn't broken. In fact, something inside her had ignited. While resting at home, she spent time watching her mother mold clay pots for the village market. One day, Mama Ifeoma handed Chioma a small lump of clay and said gently, "Let your hands speak, my child. The body may be light, but the spirit is weighty." Chioma shaped the clay with unsure fingers at first, but soon her long, nimble hands found rhythm. She created a small bowl with lines that reminded her of the patterns she had seen on the ancestor tree. When it dried, she traced those shapes with charcoal, not knowing what they truly meant but feeling their ancient power. Then came the water-fetching task again, a daily burden for the girls in the village. Chioma was paired with her least favorite peer, Adeabi, a girl who always led the laughter. As they made their way to the river, Chioma carried her clay pot with focus, determined to prove herself. But on the way back, her hand slipped. The pot shattered at the feet of Elder Okeke, who had just stepped out of his compound. "Clumsy stick child," he bellowed, his voice cracking like thunder. Chioma dropped to her knees to pick up the pieces. But then, something strange happened. Her fingers, coated in river mud, traced an accidental pattern in the red earth, a perfect Adinkra symbol for freedom and independence. Teacher Is, who had just arrived to fetch water, stared in awe. "That's Fohodi," he said quietly. "A sacred symbol, where did you learn this?" "I didn't," Chioma whispered. "It came to me." He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. That night, Chioma collected the pot shards and glued them back together using sap and golden powder from a flower her mother had dried long ago. What was once a broken vessel now glittered with cracks like veins of gold. Like the Japanese teacher is later said, holding the pot in class. They call it kintsugi. Beauty in brokenness. Years passed. Chioma became a silent force in the classroom. She didn't grow in size. Her limbs remained narrow, her cheeks hollow. But her words, those grew. Her voice, once trembled, now rang clear and deliberate. The teasing never fully stopped, but now there was confusion beneath the laughter. The same children who mocked her found themselves borrowing her notes, seeking her quiet advice. The same teachers who once overlooked her began calling on her during debates and discussions. Then came the day her desk was defaced. Carved deep into the wood were the letters, W-E-A-K. A cruel hand, likely Keen's, had slashed it with a machete. The fresh sap still wept from the wound. But Chioma didn't flinch. She dipped her quill into the bleeding tree gum and began to write. Letter by letter, she continued the word W-E-K-N-S-S-B-E-C-O-M-E-S-M-E. Around the carved insult, she wrote her first full poem. The words spiraled like vines climbing a ruined wall. When teacher is saw it, he didn't erase it. He left it there, preserved. Later, he sent a photograph of the desk to the National Museum of Childhood in Lagos, where it would be displayed as a symbol of resilience. The regional debate topic was announced, tradition versus progress. Everyone in the village knew that Chioma would be chosen to represent the school, whether they liked it or not. Whispers filled the compound. She'll embarrass us. She's not even strong enough to carry a god. But on the debate stage, when Elder Okeke's grandson argued that women were too emotional for leadership, Chioma stood, her pendant glowing faintly at her neck. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, Queen Amina ruled Zozo for over 34 years. She led armies and expanded territory. The crowd shifted. During the 1929 Women's War, Noniruwa stood against colonial taxation. She wasn't weak. She was a mirror. A wind. A flame. Suddenly, a gust of wind tore through the gathering, lifting the thatched roof and revealing the night sky, where the constellation of Chioma's birth night sparkled brightly. People gasped. The elders said it was a sign. But not everyone was pleased. That same night, shadows moved through the Nwosu compound. Chioma awoke to the sound of dry leaves crunching outside her window. A voice hissed, time to remind the stick girl of her place. Before she could scream, the pendant around her neck began to glow. Its symbols, now familiar, lit up and projected ancient carvings onto the mud walls. They pulsed with energy. The would-be attackers dropped their blades and fell to their knees. The village awoke to the tale of what happened. And suddenly, everyone understood, Chioma wasn't ordinary. In Lagos, where the streets were fast and the buildings tall, Chioma studied literature and cultural anthropology. Even here, her body drew stares. Some students assumed she was sick or starving. But her mind shone. When a lecturer mocked her village accent, she stood and recited a blend of Shakespeare's Sonnet 29 and Okigbo's verse, fluidly, flawlessly. The room was silent. She later joined a poetry collective, Daughters of Dust, alongside other young women who felt invisible. Ikin, who was mocked for being too dark. Bisola, who stammered. Leila, who had scars from an accident. Together, they created viral spoken word pieces like We Are Not Mistakes and Bones of Power. Their voices were shared across Africa. Girls from villages in Mali, Ghana, Kenya wrote to them. Chioma was now anti-wind, the voice of the forgotten. She won a national poetry contest. With the prize money, she returned to Umuocha and built the Sky Library, named after the words she saw on the ancestor tree. The library was small but filled with books wrapped in Kent cloth, their titles written in Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa. Each spine bore a carved symbol. Children entered barefoot and left floating. At 40, Chioma was invited to speak at the United Nations in Geneva. Her topic: Invisible Girls, Turning Shame into Strength. She wore her pendant. She carried the golden cracked pot she'd once mended. She spoke not only with wisdom, but with fire. And on her 60th birthday, under the Udola tree of her childhood, she sat surrounded by her family. Her grandniece, Ifinanya, played quietly near the roots. Chioma called her close and handed her the pendant. As Ifinanya placed it around her neck, the carvings shifted to match her heartbeat. "I feel them," the girl whispered. "All the girls. All the stories." Chioma smiled, her eyes misty. "Then it is yours now." In that moment, across Africa, thousands of pendants glowed on girls who were once laughed at. And from the stars above, a new constellation formed, the shape of a slim girl standing tall. A reminder to the world. She was once laughed at. Now, she is legendary. Ifinanya held the pendant close to her chest. It was warm, not just from the sun, but from something older, something sacred. That night, as the wind whispered through the rafters of their home, she had a dream. In it, she stood atop a hill made of books, surrounded by the voices of girls, some crying, some laughing, all speaking their truths. And in the middle of them stood Chioma, smiling. "You are the wind now," Chioma said in the dream. "Go where stories are hidden. Let none remain buried." When Ifinanya woke, she found Chioma's journal by her bedside. Inside were pages filled with unfinished letters, drawings, ancient proverbs, and a map with places marked, small villages, orphanages, forgotten schools. There was a note at the bottom in Chioma's careful handwriting: "These are the girls who still think they are shadows. Bring them light." And so, the legacy continued. Ifinanya picked up where Chioma left off, visiting every place marked on that map. She carried the pendant and a portable speaker that played Chioma's recorded speeches. Wherever she went, crowds gathered to listen, not just to Ifinanya, but to the wind that carried her great-aunt's voice. One day, in a remote village by the Congo River, a girl named Zuwina approached Ifinanya after a gathering. She said nothing at first, just held out a notebook filled with drawings of faceless women. "I don't know how to give them eyes," she whispered. "I've never seen myself clearly enough." Ifinanya hugged her and replied, "Then let's draw together." That night, under a lantern's glow, they gave the faceless women eyes, some sad, some brave, some dancing with joy. Back in Umuocha, elders commissioned a statue in Chioma's honor. But Ifinanya insisted on something different. She was not meant to be stone, she said. She was meant to move. Instead of a statue, they planted a garden, a spiral of rare flowers from all the places Chioma had visited. Each plant bore a small plaque with the name of a girl whose life had been changed. At the center stood the Udola tree, which had healed itself after the lightning strike, its leaves more vibrant than ever. Tourists came from far and wide, not to take photos, but to sit, reflect, and write letters to girls they had once hurt or ignored. The garden became known as the Spiral of Stories. When Ifinanya turned 40, she gave her own speech at the African Women's Renaissance Conference. She wore Chioma's pendant and began with the words, "There once was a girl so slim, the world thought she would break in the wind. But she became the wind." The crowd rose in applause, many weeping. Mothers clutched their daughters. Young girls stood taller. In the final years of her life, Ifinanya compiled all of Chioma's writings into a book titled Whispers in the Wind. It became a bestseller not because of flashy marketing, but because every page felt like an embrace. Within its pages were stories of shame transformed into power, scars turned into symbols, silence turned into song. And when Ifinanya's time came, she returned to the Udola tree. Her grandniece, Edeora, held her hand. "Will I know what to do?" Edeora asked, her voice trembling. "You already do," Ifinanya whispered. "The wind knows how to find its way." And as the sun set, a gentle breeze swept through the garden, carrying with it the laughter of girls once silenced and the legacy of Chioma, the girl who was laughed at and became legendary.